In 1974, a teenage girl went on a first date in Fort Worth, Texas. She never came home. For nearly half a century, her family waited. The police searched. Suspects came and went. Evidence sat in boxes. And one man lived his entire life without being held accountable. This is the story of Carla Jan Walker, a case that haunted Texas for 46 years, and one that was finally solved, not by luck, not by confession, but by patience, science, and time. Carla Jan Walker was 17 years old. She lived in Fort Worth, Texas, with her family. Friends described her as kind, quiet, and responsible. She was the kind of teenager parents trusted. Carla worked part-time at Western Hills Bowling Alley. She liked normal things, music, movies, spending time with friends. Nothing about her life suggested danger. On the evening of February 16, 1974, Carla went on a date with her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy. They planned to attend a school dance. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday night. It became the last night Carla was ever seen alive. After the dance, Carla and Rodney parked at Holiday Skate Rink, a popular local hangout for teenagers. They sat in Rodney's car, talking. At around 9:30 p.m., a man approached the vehicle. He was armed with a gun. The man forced Rodney out of the car. He struck him repeatedly with the gun. Rodney was beaten badly, left bleeding on the ground. Then the man took Carla. He drove away in Rodney's car, with Carla inside. Rodney survived. Carla did not. Police were called immediately. Roadblocks were set up, but by the time officers arrived, the kidnapper was already gone. 3 days later, on February 19, 1974, Carla's body was found. She was discovered in a drainage ditch near Benbrook Lake, about 10 miles from where she was taken. She had been sexually assaulted. She had been strangled. The brutality shocked the community. Fort Worth police launched a full investigation. But in 1974, tools were limited. There were no DNA databases, no genetic genealogy, no modern forensic testing, only witness statements, physical evidence, and memory. Rodney McCoy gave a detailed description of the attacker. Police created a composite sketch. Several suspects were questioned. None could be conclusively tied to the crime. Carla's case slowly went cold. Years passed. Her parents never stopped asking questions, never stopped hoping. Evidence from the crime, including biological material, was carefully preserved. That decision would matter decades later. Even as the case faded from headlines, it never fully disappeared. Detectives revisited it periodically. Each time, the same problem remained. There was no name. The killer lived freely. He built a life. He grew old. Meanwhile, Carla's family grew older without answers. By the 2000s, many assumed the case would never be solved. They were wrong. In the late 2010s, Fort Worth police decided to re-examine old cold cases using modern DNA technology. Carla Walker's case was one of them. Biological evidence collected in 1974 was tested again. This time, investigators created a DNA profile of the suspect. But there was still no direct match in criminal databases. So they tried something new. Police turned to genetic genealogy, the same method used to catch the Golden State Killer. Instead of looking for the suspect, they looked for relatives, distant cousins, family connections, shared ancestry. Slowly, a family tree was built. One name stood out. The DNA trail led to Robert Russell Keller. He lived in Texas in 1974. He matched the physical description. He had no criminal record for violent crimes. Keller was an ordinary man on the surface, but his DNA told a different story. Investigators collected a discarded item containing Keller's DNA. The match was confirmed. After 46 years, police finally had their suspect. In June 2020, Robert Russell Keller was arrested. He was 72 years old. He was charged with capital murder. For Carla's family, the moment was overwhelming. Justice had taken nearly half a century, but it had arrived. Keller later pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. In 2021, Keller was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In court, Carla's family spoke. They talked about birthdays missed, holidays without her, a lifetime of grief. Keller showed no public remorse. But his silence no longer mattered. The truth was known. Carla Walker's case is not just a murder story. It is proof that cold cases are never truly dead. Evidence matters, even decades later. Science can succeed where time failed. Victims are not forgotten. One preserved sample, one patient investigation, one breakthrough, and a killer who thought he had escaped forever was finally named. Carla Walker was 17 years old. She deserved a future. She did not get justice in her lifetime, but she was not forgotten. After 46 years, the truth came out, and sometimes that is enough to remind us. Time does not erase guilt, and the truth has a long memory. This was Truth Trove Stories. Thank you for watching. In December 1992, a quiet Pennsylvania town woke up to a crime it never expected. A young schoolteacher was found brutally murdered inside her own classroom. There were no witnesses, no clear suspects, no arrest. For more than 2 decades, her case went cold, but the truth never disappeared. And in 2018, 26 years later, science finally spoke. This is the story of Christy Myrick. Christy Myrick was 25 years old. She lived in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and she was exactly the kind of person parents hope their children will learn from. Christy worked as a teacher's aide at Refton Elementary School, part of the Penn Manor School District. She was kind, soft-spoken, dedicated to her students. Friends described her as someone who put others first, especially children. Teaching wasn't just her job. It was her calling. No one who knew her believed her life could end in violence. But on December 21st, 1992, everything changed. It was the last week before Christmas break. Christy arrived early at Refton Elementary School, as she often did. She was alone in her classroom. Sometime that morning, before students arrived, someone entered the school. That person attacked Christy inside her classroom. She was beaten. She was strangled. She was sexually assaulted. Her body was later discovered by another teacher. The school was immediately locked down. Parents rushed to pick up their children. Lancaster County had just experienced a nightmare. Refton was a small, close-knit community. Violent crime was rare. A murder inside an elementary school was unthinkable. Police from the Manor Township Police Department, Pennsylvania State Police, and county investigators flooded the area. They searched the school. They searched nearby roads. They interviewed staff, parents, and residents. But there was a terrifying reality. There were no witnesses. Whoever killed Christy knew the building or had the confidence to walk in unnoticed. Investigators worked relentlessly. They collected forensic evidence from the classroom and Christy's body. In 1992, DNA technology existed, but it was limited. They were able to create a DNA profile of the killer. But without a suspect to compare it to, the profile went nowhere. Police interviewed hundreds of people, former students' relatives, maintenance workers, local men with criminal records. No arrest. The case slowly went cold, but it was never forgotten. Christy's parents lived with unimaginable grief. Christmas would never be the same. They watched years pass without justice. Every new lead raised hope and then disappeared. But they never stopped believing that one day the truth would come out. And investigators never destroyed the evidence. That decision would change everything. By the 2010s, forensic science had transformed. DNA databases had expanded dramatically. In 2017, investigators decided to re-examine the evidence using modern DNA testing. They uploaded the killer's DNA profile into CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database. And then, they got a hit. The DNA matched Raymond Charles Rowe, also known as DJ Freeze. Rowe was a former radio DJ in the Lancaster area. He had worked nearby at the time of the murder. In 1992, he was not on police radar. But years later, his DNA was in the system due to unrelated offenses. When police tested a discarded item Rowe had touched, the match was confirmed. After 26 years, Christy Myrick finally had a name connected to her death. On June 19, 2018, Raymond Rowe was arrested. He was charged with criminal homicide, rape, involuntary deviate sexual intercourse, aggravated assault. Lancaster County watched closely. The community that had waited decades finally saw movement. Rowe initially pleaded not guilty, but the DNA evidence was overwhelming. During trial proceedings, prosecutors laid out the science. DNA from the crime scene matched Rowe with near certainty. There was no alternate explanation. In 2019, Raymond Rowe pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. No appeals, no early release. For the Myrick family, justice had finally arrived, though far too late. Christy Myrick's case became a powerful example of the importance of preserving evidence, the power of DNA science, the reality that time does not erase guilt. It sent a message to cold case killers everywhere. You can run, you can hide, but science remembers. Christy Myrick was only 25 years old. She never got the life she deserved, but her case proved something important. Justice does not expire. It can wait quietly for years until the truth is ready to speak. This was Truth Trove Stories. Thank you for watching. In 1993, a young mother vanished in Florida. No straged, no witnesses, no clear answers. Her name was Bonnie Lee Hyam. For decades, her case sat quietly in police files, unsolved, unresolved, and almost forgotten. But time did not erase the truth. In 2019, more than 25 years later, investigators finally uncovered what happened inside a quiet Florida home and how a child witnessed a crime without fully understanding it. This is the story of Bonnie Hyam, a disappearance, a hidden murder, and a truth that waited years to be spoken. This is Truth Trove Stories. Bonnie Lee Hyam was born in 1968. She was described by family and friends as kind, gentle, and devoted to her son. By the early 1990s, Bonnie was living in Nassau County, Florida, near the town of Callahan, just north of Jacksonville. She was married to Michael Hyam, a man who worked as an electrician. Together, they had a young son named Aaron Hyam. On the outside, they looked like a normal family. But inside their home, the marriage was deeply troubled. Friends later described Michael as controlling and emotionally abusive. Bonnie had begun talking about leaving him. She wanted a safer life, especially for her child. And that decision may have sealed her fate. On January 6, 1993, Bonnie Hyam disappeared. She was 24 years old. That morning, Bonnie was last seen at home with her husband and her son. There were no signs of a break-in, no signs of a struggle. Her car was still there. Her personal belongings were untouched. Michael Hyam told police that Bonnie had left on her own. He claimed she was upset and simply walked away. But almost immediately, his story raised questions. Bonnie had no money, no packed bags, and no reason to leave her son behind. Still, without evidence of a crime, police had little to go on. Bonnie was officially listed as a missing person. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into years. And the case slowly went cold. From the very beginning, Bonnie's family suspected Michael Hyam. But suspicion is not proof. Michael passed multiple interviews. No body was found. No forensic evidence was recovered. Eventually, Michael moved on with his life. He remarried. He raised Aaron. And he continued living in Florida. Bonnie's case faded into the background. But inside the Hyam household, something strange was happening. Aaron, Bonnie's son, was growing up with memories that didn't fully make sense. Memories that would stay buried for years. As Aaron grew older, fragments of memory began resurfacing. He remembered being very young, sitting inside the house. He remembered loud arguing. And he remembered something disturbing: his father killing his mother. At the time, Aaron was too young to understand what he had seen. As a child, he assumed his mother would come back. But she never did. Years later, those memories became impossible to ignore. Aaron began asking questions. He contacted police. And for the first time in decades, Bonnie Hyam's case reopened. In the late 2010s, detectives from the Nassau County Sheriff's Office revisited the case. They re-interviewed witnesses. They reviewed old files. And most importantly, they listened to Aaron. Aaron provided a chilling account. He stated that his father stabbed Bonnie to death during an argument. He said the murder happened inside the home. And then came the most disturbing detail of all. Michael Hyam had buried Bonnie's body under a fire pit in their backyard. Police returned to the property. Ground-penetrating radar was used, and beneath the concrete fire pit, they found human remains. In 2019, forensic experts confirmed the remains belonged to Bonnie Hyam. She had been murdered in 1993. For 26 years, her body had been hidden just feet from where her family lived. Michael Hyam was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The case that once seemed impossible to solve was finally closed. In court, prosecutors laid out the evidence. Aaron testified, facing the man who took his mother's life. Michael Hyam was convicted. He received a life sentence. For Bonnie's family, justice had come, painfully late, but undeniable. Aaron later spoke publicly about the burden he carried for years. A child forced to live with a secret he didn't understand. A truth that waited until he was strong enough to speak it. Bonnie Hyam was 24 years old when her life was taken. She never got the future she dreamed of. She never got to watch her son grow up. But her story did not disappear. It waited, for decades, until the truth finally surfaced. This case proves something important. Justice does not expire. It can wait quietly until someone is brave enough to speak. This was the story of Bonnie Hyam. Thank you for watching Truth Trove Stories. December 24th, 1991, Christmas Eve on Hawaii's Big Island. A young woman from Virginia was about to have her life changed forever. Her name was Dana Ireland, age 23. What started as a holiday visit turned into one of the most haunting, unsolved crimes in Hawaii's history. A case that would tear families apart, send innocent men to prison, and remain unsolved for more than 30 years. Today, for the first time in decades, we're telling the full story. Who Dana was, what happened to her, why the investigation went wrong, how new science finally brought clarity, and who the real suspect was. This is the truth behind the Dana Ireland case. Dana Ireland was a young woman from Virginia. Bright, adventurous, and full of life, she planned a trip to the Big Island of Hawaii during the holiday season of 1991. Like many travelers, Dana wanted to experience Hawaii's beauty, the ocean, the trails, the untouched landscape. But on that quiet Christmas Eve, something went horribly wrong. On December 24th, 1991, Dana was riding her bicycle near a rural stretch on the east side of the Big Island. At some point, she was hit by a vehicle, a violent collision that left her critically injured. Soon after, Dana was found along a remote fishing trail near Puna, partially clothed and barely alive. Investigators later concluded that she had been sexually assaulted and brutally beaten before being left on that trail. Emergency responders transported her to Hilo Medical Center, where she died early on December 25, 1991, Christmas Day, from massive injuries and blood loss. It was a shocking and senseless crime that rocked the local community and drew national attention. In the months and years that followed, Hawaii law enforcement scrambled to find Dana's killer. Under intense pressure from the public and Dana's grieving family, investigators made arrests. 3 men, including Albert Ian Schweitzer and his brother Sean Schweitzer, and a third man named Frank Pauline Jr., were indicted and went to trial. In 2000, juries convicted the Schweitzer brothers and Pauline for the rape and murder of Dana Ireland. Ian Schweitzer was sentenced to life in prison, while Sean took a plea deal and served a short sentence with probation. But there was one huge problem. No DNA evidence from the crime scene matched any of these men. In fact, DNA from semen and other evidence taken from Dana's body belonged to an unknown male, someone whose identity was not in any criminal database at the time. Despite the lack of physical evidence tying the Schweitzers or Pauline to the crime, prosecutors pushed forward. Later analysis showed that testimony used against the brothers may have been unreliable or influenced by pressure to close the case. Ian Schweitzer maintained his innocence every day he was behind bars, and for more than 2 decades, he fought to clear his name. Advances in DNA science eventually changed everything. Years after the convictions, new testing technology, including genetic genealogy and improved forensic methods, allowed experts to re-examine evidence from the Dana, Ireland crime scene. This included DNA found on her body and on items recovered at the locations where she was attacked. In 2023, Hawaii courts finally vacated the convictions of both Ian and Sean Schweitzer, acknowledging that the DNA evidence excluded them as contributors and that they were wrongfully convicted. For Ian, this meant 23 years lost behind bars for a crime he did not commit. At last, justice for these innocent men became possible, but investigators still needed to find the real killer. Through DNA, genetic genealogy, and other modern forensic work, investigators identified a new person of interest, Albert Loro Jr., a man who lived less than 2 miles from where Dana's body was found and who would have been about 25 years old at the time of the crime. DNA taken from discarded items he used, and later confirmed with a cheek swab, matched the DNA recovered from Dana's body in the crime scene. Despite this compelling match, law enforcement did not arrest Loro. Instead, they invited him in to voluntarily provide the DNA swab. Afterward, he was allowed to leave. Shortly after, Loro took his own life at his home. Only then, through DNA confirmation, did authorities publicly disclose that he was the most likely person responsible for Dana's rape and murder. This brought a bittersweet end to the search for Dana's killer. The identity was found, but he never faced justice in court. The tragedies in this case run deep. For the Ireland family, the truth arrived more than 30 years late. For the Schweitzer brothers, years of freedom were robbed by wrongful conviction and a justice system under pressure. And for Albert Loro Jr., his final act prevented answers that only a trial could provide. The Dana Ireland case is now a powerful reminder of the importance of following evidence, especially DNA, and of the devastating consequences when investigations rely on pressure and assumption instead of facts. Dana Ireland is remembered not for how her life ended, but for the impact her case has had on cold case investigations and forensic science. If you found this story compelling, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into solved and cold cases from around the world. Leave a comment below with what you think about how this case unfolded. Thanks for watching Truth Trove Stories, where the forgotten truths come to light. In June of 1993, a quiet neighborhood in Minneapolis, Minnesota became the scene of a crime so brutal and confusing that it haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. The victim was Jeannie Childs, a 35-year-old woman living alone in a small apartment on 27th Avenue South, near Minnehaha Creek. She had no known enemies, no history of violence, and no obvious reason to be targeted. What police found inside her apartment shocked even experienced detectives. The case went cold for 29 years, until one name, long forgotten, finally surfaced again. This is the story of Jeannie Childs, who killed her, and why it took nearly 30 years to uncover the truth. Jeannie Childs was born in 1957 and grew up in Minnesota. By 1993, she was 35 years old and living a quiet, independent life in Minneapolis. Friends and family described her as intelligent, private, and soft-spoken. She worked various jobs over the years and was known to keep mostly to herself. Jeannie wasn't involved in drugs, gangs, or dangerous relationships. She lived in a modest apartment building at 401 East 27th Street, a typical residential area. Nothing about her lifestyle suggested she was in danger. That's what made what happened next so disturbing. On June 13th, 1993, Jeannie's father went to check on her after not hearing from her for several days. When he arrived at her apartment, something immediately felt wrong. Jeannie's door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was silent. As he walked further in, he made a horrifying discovery. Jeannie Childs was lying on the floor of her bedroom. She was dead. Police arrived quickly, and what they found left them stunned. Jeannie had been stabbed more than 60 times. The wounds were concentrated around her chest, neck, and upper body, suggesting extreme rage. Even more disturbing, the murder weapon, a broken knife blade, was still embedded in her chest. The handle had snapped off during the attack. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No damis lax. This suggested that Jeannie knew her killer, or at least trusted them enough to let them inside. Despite the brutality, the apartment was not ransacked. Nothing valuable appeared to be stolen. This was not a robbery. This was personal. Minneapolis police immediately launched a full investigation. They interviewed neighbors, family members, co-workers, and anyone who had contact with Jeannie in the days before her death. Several facts stood out. Jeannie lived alone. She had no current romantic partner. She had no history of domestic violence. She was last seen alive a few days earlier. There were no witnesses who saw anyone suspicious entering or leaving her apartment. No justifiable fingerprints. No security cameras. This was 1993. The only potential evidence was DNA, recovered from under Jeannie's fingernails and from blood at the scene. But in 1993, DNA technology was limited. The DNA profile did not match anyone in law enforcement databases at the time. With no suspect and no leads, the case slowly went cold. Over the years, detectives periodically reviewed the case. The sheer violence of the murder suggested intense anger, possibly rejection, jealousy, or perceived betrayal. Investigators believed the killer was likely a man, someone Jeannie knew, someone who felt personally wronged. But belief is not proof. And without DNA matches or witnesses, the case remained unsolved. For Jeannie's family, the pain never faded. For detectives, the case became one that lingered in the back of their minds, a reminder of unfinished justice. By the late 2010s, DNA science had changed dramatically. Cold cases across the United States were being solved using genetic genealogy, a technique that allows investigators to identify suspects through family DNA connections. In 2021, Minneapolis police decided to take another look at the DNA from Jeannie Child's murder. The evidence was sent for advanced testing. This time, something changed. The DNA profile produced a lead. Not a name at first, but a family line. And slowly, that family tree narrowed, until one name stood out. The DNA led investigators to James Gary Delaska. Delaska was not a stranger. He was someone Jeannie Childs had known. In fact, he had been romantically interested in her years earlier. Records showed that Delaska and Jeannie had crossed paths in the late 1980s. Jeannie had rejected him. Friends later confirmed that Delaska had become obsessed, angry, and resentful. But by 1993, Delaska had moved on, or so it seemed. In reality, the anger never left. James Gary Delaska was born in 1953. He had a history of violence against women, including sexual assault. He was known to harbor grudges and had difficulty accepting rejection. By the time police identified him in 2021, Delaska was already dead. He had died in 2012. At first, investigators worried they would never be able to officially close the case. But the DNA told a clear story. The DNA recovered from under Jeannie Child's fingernails matched Delaska's genetic profile through family comparisons. There was no doubt. He was the killer. Investigators believed the motive was rejection and rage. Jeannie Childs had made it clear she was not interested in a relationship with Delaska. For most people, rejection hurts, but they move on. For Delaska, it became an obsession. Detectives believe that on the night of the murder, Delaska went to Jeannie's apartment, possibly under the pretense of talking or reconnecting. She let him in. At some point, an argument began. Jeannie likely tried to defend herself. That's when Delaska snapped. The sheer number of stab wounds indicates overkill, a classic sign of personal rage rather than planned murder. This was not about money. This was not random. This was about control, rejection, and a man who could not accept no. The reason this case took nearly 3 decades to solve comes down to one thing: timing. In 1993, DNA databases were small. Genetic genealogy didn't exist. Delaska was not in Cody's. There was no way to link him to the crime. Only when technology advanced did the truth finally emerge. In 2022, Minneapolis police officially announced that James Gary Delaska was responsible for the murder of Jeannie Childs. The case was closed. Some may ask, does it matter if the killer is already dead? For Jeannie's family, The answer is yes. They finally had a name, an explanation, the truth. Jeannie Childs was not forgotten. Her case did not disappear into a file cabinet. It waited, and eventually, science spoke when silence could not. The murder of Jeannie Childs reminds us that some crimes leave scars that time cannot erase. But it also reminds us that justice does not always move quickly. Sometimes it waits for better tools, waits for truth to surface, waits for someone to finally listen. Nearly 30 years later, Jeannie Childs finally got her answer, and her killer was finally named. If you found this story compelling, like the video and subscribe to Truth Trove Stories for more deep dives into solved and cold cases from around the world. Leave a comment below. Do you think cases like this prove that no crime is ever truly forgotten? Thanks for watching Truth Trove Stories, where the hidden truth always comes to light.